Three nuns vanished without a trace from St. Mary's Convent, just outside Ashford Hollow, New Hampshire, on a bitter February night in 1991. The small, close-knit community searched for answers for years, but the mystery faded into local legend. A chilling tale whispered by firesides and taught in schools as one of rural America's greatest unsolved disappearances. 32 years later, while renovating the convent's old library, a construction worker made an astonishing discovery behind a false wall, a hidden journal. The weathered pages held more than just answers to what happened to the three missing women. They unveiled a darkness so profound, many in the quiet historic town would rather it had stayed buried. The truth, long entombed, would forever reshape our understanding of what truly transpired that frigid winter night. But before we uncover the fate of sisters Eleanor, Claire, and Emily, if you're intrigued by tales of mystery and the unexplained, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon. We've got weekly stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Now let's return to Ashford Hollow and discover how it all began. Nestled in the hills of southern New Hampshire, Ashford Hollow is a town where time moves slow and deliberate. In the early 90s, it was much as it is now, just over 5,000 residents, cobbled streets, a grand Romanesque cathedral at its center, and sturdy limestone buildings that stood like silent sentinels. The bite of New England's winter cut through even the thickest coats, and the town was often shrouded in early morning fog that clung to rooftops and curled around the church spires, casting a ghostly hue that clashed with the warmth of the locals' hospitality. Perched on the town's outskirts, surrounded by wheat fields and wild poppies that would erupt into crimson during spring, stood the gray stone convent of St. Mary's. Built in the 16th century and home in 1991 to 15 members of the Discalced Carmelite order, it was a place held in deep regard by townsfolk. The sisters were known both for their quiet devotion and for the exquisite pastries they baked using recipes handed down through generations. The three missing nuns were as distinct in personality as they were united in faith. Sister Eleanor Matthews, 63, originally from upstate New York, had served the order for over 4 decades. A strict but fair woman, she was the convent's disciplinarian. Her sharp blue eyes seldom missed a misstep, yet she harbored a surprising talent for music, conducting the choir with a fervor that softened her stern exterior. Sister Claire Whitaker, 42, was born in New England, but had lived much of her early life in Chicago, where she abandoned a promising career in medicine to join the convent. Smart and level-headed, she ran the infirmary and provided care to the town's elderly. Her delicate wire-framed glasses gave her an air of intellectual calm, though her eyes would darken when her past came up, an area she rarely discussed. She wore beneath her habit a small silver medallion, the only remnant of her former life she had allowed herself to keep. The youngest sister, Emily Hart, was just 26 when she vanished. Born in a tiny Appalachian town, she had arrived at the convent only 3 years prior, following a personal crisis she never fully shared. With an ever-ready smile and an infectious energy, she quickly endeared herself to everyone. She tended the convent's garden with uncanny skill, coaxing life from soil others deemed too stubborn. In a well-worn journal, she recorded not only the planting seasons, but deeply personal reflections on her spiritual journey. Life inside the convent followed a strict rhythm. Each day began before dawn, with matins followed by structured hours of labor, prayer, and study. Meals were simple but nourishing, and silence reigned save for brief moments of recreation. The three women lived peacefully under this routine, or so it appeared. Beneath the surface of quiet dedication, small fractures began to form. In the months before their disappearance, locals noted subtle shifts. Sister Eleanor, once a watchful presence, had grown withdrawn. Sister Claire had been spotted more than once digging through ancient records at the public library. And young Emily, normally lighthearted, had been seen in several intense conversations with Father Thomas Greaves, the parish priest, which left her visibly shaken each time. What seemed like a quiet life of prayer and contemplation was in hindsight laced with secrets and soon tragedy. As the winter of 1991 deepened its grip, draping the landscape in icy silence and early nightfall, No one in Ashford Hollow could have imagined that three women bound by faith and a life of devotion were about to vanish into the darkness, leaving behind a mystery that would linger for over 3 decades. Just one day before they disappeared, a peculiar visitor arrived at St. Mary's Convent. A man in his late 40s, dressed in a crisp, dark suit, requested a private audience with the Mother Superior. No one ever discovered the reason for his visit, but that evening at dinner, Sisters Eleanor, Claire, and Emily barely touched their food. The usual hum of quiet contentment had been replaced by a tension so palpable it clung to the air like frost on window panes. February 18th dawned colder than usual across southern New Hampshire. A thin sheet of ice blanketed the convent's fields, and the rooftops shimmered beneath the pale light of daybreak for Sisters Eleanor, Claire, and Emily. The day began just like any other. They rose at 5 for matins, their voices echoing softly through the chapel, still cloaked in darkness, lit only by flickering candlelight and a sliver of moon that spilled through the rose window above. Sister Eleanor led the morning hymns with her customary precision, though Sister Beatrice, the convent's organist, later remarked that her voice trembled slightly in places, a detail uncharacteristic for someone so composed. After breakfast, freshly baked bread and a warm mug of café au lait, each sister returned to her usual duties. Sister Eleanor retreated to the convent archive where she'd spent weeks cataloging centuries-old manuscripts. Sister Claire worked in the infirmary preparing herbal teas to soothe the aching joints of one of the elderly nuns. Despite the biting cold, Emily tended the garden carefully, covering delicate herbs and vegetables to shield them from the hard frost that crept in each night. Later that morning, the mail arrived. Among the envelopes was a certified letter addressed to Sister Eleanor. Rachel Cruz, the young novice who accepted the delivery, would later recall the way Sister Eleanor's face went pale when she recognized the return address. She turned ghost white, Rachel would later tell investigators. Her hands were trembling so badly she had to sit down before opening it. At lunch, the 3 sisters sat closely at the far end of the refectory table, an odd choice since they usually mingled among the other nuns. They whispered to one another in low voices. Though convent rules strictly forbade speaking during meals, Mother Superior Pilar Shepherd chose not to intervene. She later admitted sensing something urgent in their hushed tones, something that made her hesitate. The last person outside the convent to see them alive was Javier Mendez, a 57-year-old farmer who made weekly produce deliveries to the convent's kitchen. They were all standing by the back entrance near the storage sheds, he would recall. The young one, Emily, looked like she'd been crying. He said they greeted him politely just like always, but something felt off. The eldest sister, Eleanor, was holding a bundle wrapped in dark cloth. I didn't think much of it at the time. Around 6 p.m., when the community gathered in the chapel for Vespers, the 3 sisters were noticeably absent. Thinking perhaps Sister Claire had been delayed tending to the sick Mother Pilar, sent Sister Beatrice to find them. But they were nowhere to be found. Their rooms were empty, their few personal belongings undisturbed. In Emily's room, the small journal she always kept under her mattress was missing, and in Sister Claire's cell, her cherished silver medallion had been left atop her Bible open to Psalm 55. "Oh, that I had wings like a dove, I would fly away and be at rest." By 8:00 p.m., growing anxious, the Mother Superior phoned Father Thomas Greaves, the parish priest, who urged her to contact the sheriff immediately. At 9:30 p.m., 2 deputies from the local sheriff's department arrived and began an official search. By then, the temperature had plummeted below freezing, and a soft snow had begun to fall. The first sweep focused on the convent grounds, the garden, the old wine cellar, the burial plot, where generations of nuns had been laid to rest. Then the search expanded outward into the surrounding woods and along the rural road leading to town. That night, as the snow came down harder, 20 volunteers fanned out through the darkness, flashlights cutting through the trees, search dogs sniffing for clues. But there was nothing. No footprints, no signs of struggle, no dropped items or scattered robes. The most baffling discovery was the complete absence of any footprints in the fresh snow. It was as if the three women had simply evaporated into thin air, leaving behind nothing but questions. Questions that settled over Ashford Hollow like snow on the rooftops, quietly piling up year after year. 2 days later, what seemed at first to be a trivial detail caught the attention of Sergeant Cruz, the lead investigator on the case. In the convent's library, a copy of The Interior Castle by St. Clare of Avila had been shelved upside down. Curious, he pulled the book from the shelf and noticed a thin crimson thread marking a page in the chapter on the soul's inner chambers. Scribbled faintly in the margin in a neat, almost timid hand were the words, "The truth lies beneath, not above." Was it an intentional clue or a mere coincidence? No one could say for sure. As the days passed and the investigation dragged on, the town of Ashford Hollow grew increasingly divided. Some believed the sisters had been abducted, while others whispered of a planned escape. No one imagined that the answer would remain hidden for over 30 years, or how devastating its eventual revelation would be. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and then into years. Not a single sign of Sisters Eleanor Clare or Emily ever surfaced. Life at St. Mary's Convent carried on, though forever marked by a wound that never quite healed. Mother Superior Pilar aged noticeably in the years that followed, her face furrowed with lines that traced sleepless nights and questions that refused to be silenced. Each evening before bed, she added a prayer for the missing sisters, her voice barely a whisper beneath the chapel's vaulted ceiling. Sister Eleanor's cell remained untouched, transformed into a quiet, unofficial shrine. Her sheet music still lay open on the desk, her reading glasses resting atop a well-worn Bible, and her olive wood rosary from the Holy Land hung on the wall where she'd left it that final morning in February. Novices who joined the order in the following years grew up on stories of the sister with the commanding voice who led the choir, like she was conducting angels themselves. Sister Clare's absence was especially felt by the elderly in town, who had come to rely on her for comfort and care. Mrs. Remedios Lopez, 82, in 1991, kept a tiny glass bottle of rheumatism balm Clare had once made just for her. Nothing ever worked quite like hers, she'd often say. Her hands didn't just heal, they loved. But perhaps the most aching void was left by Emily. Her once vibrant garden slowly withered under less skillful hands. The exotic flowers she had miraculously coaxed into bloom in New Hampshire's harsh climate didn't survive beyond the second winter. It was as if the land itself mourned her absence. Beyond the convent walls, the town of Ashford Hollow was changing. The disappearance of the three nuns became a media sensation, drawing local reporters at first, then national and even foreign press. For weeks, satellite trucks clogged the cobblestone streets. Photographers roamed the square in front of St. James Cathedral, and the old bar Holloway just across the street saw business boom. Its owner, Anselmo Garcia, went so far as to invent a macabre tourist dish called the Sisters Special. Visitors ordered it as a kind of dark novelty. But time, as always, wore away at public curiosity. Other headlines stole the spotlight: the Gulf War, the upcoming Summer Olympics in Atlanta, the signing of international trade pacts. The nuns' case faded into occasional midnight television specials or fringe magazine articles about unsolved mysteries. Some went as far as to suggest alien abduction or demonic rituals, claims that deeply wounded the convent community and the families of the missing. The families suffered most in that void of uncertainty. Emily's parents, Antonio and Mercedes Hart, humble farmers from a rural village in the southwest, returned to Ashford Hollow every year on the anniversary of her disappearance. They always booked the same small inn near the train station and spent hours on a bench across from the convent, watching, waiting, hoping. Mercedes passed away in 2005, never having given up faith. Antonio continued the tradition alone until 2010, when his failing health finally kept him home. Claire's brother, Gabriel Bosch, a lawyer in Boston, took a different approach. He hired private investigators, offered cash rewards, and lobbied politicians for help. He even traveled to the Vatican to ask for intervention. His marriage couldn't withstand the strain of his obsession, and his children grew up in the shadow of an aunt they only knew through photos, and their father's increasingly fantastical stories. Sister Eleanor had no living close relatives. Only a niece, Carmen Matthews, a schoolteacher in Vermont, remained. For years, Carmen kept a small altar in her living room with her aunt's picture. Every February 18th, she lit a candle and held a moment of silence. Not to mourn her, she would tell her curious students, but to honor her life, wherever she may be living it. Meanwhile, the official investigation slowly crumbled under the weight of silence. Sergeant Cruz, who had once sworn he wouldn't rest until the mystery was solved, was transferred to a post in Arizona in 1993. His replacement skimmed the file, conducted a few formal interviews, and quietly closed the case for lack of evidence. The prevailing theory in the records pointed toward voluntary departure, perhaps spurred by a crisis of faith or inner turmoil within the convent. Yet no hard proof ever emerged to support that explanation. In 1998, the Ashford Hollow Gazette ran a special feature for the 7th anniversary of the case. Journalist Joaquin Valle floated a new theory that the sisters might have vanished to protect someone else. He referenced a young man in town, Martin Herrera, who had once been accused of theft. Witnesses claimed to have seen him in deep conversation with Emily just days before she disappeared. By then, Martin was serving time for another offense. He denied any connection to the missing nuns. The theory was quickly dismissed, but the doubt it planted took root in more than a few minds. As the years slipped quietly by, the case of the missing nuns became woven into the folklore of Ashford Hollow, alongside tales of ghosts roaming the old castle ruins and the rumored sightings of the Virgin Mary near the St. Roch Chapel. Local children grew up swapping wildly embellished versions of the story, and the forest skirting the convent slowly became a place to avoid once dusk settled in. Then, in 2015, a flicker of hope reignited when someone snapped a photo in a bustling market in Quito, Ecuador, a silver-haired woman bearing an uncanny resemblance to Sister Eleanor. Gabriel Bosch caught the next flight to South America. But the woman turned out to be a Spanish missionary of a different order, who had been serving in Ecuador since the 1970s. The blow was so crushing that Gabriel suffered a mild heart attack and spent 2 weeks recovering in a Quito hospital. Life in Ashford Hollow simply carried on. The convent eventually welcomed new vocations, though it never fully regained the luster or spirit it once held. The town, like many rural pockets of America, gradually faded. Young folks moved to cities for better prospects, old storefronts closed for good, and historic landmarks crumbled inch by inch, neglected due to dwindling funds. Only one man never let the memory of the mystery fade. August Stone. Just 24 and fresh into the sheriff's department when the case broke in 1991, had helped lead the initial search. After taking early retirement in 2018 due to health issues, he began devoting his time to piecing together every thread of the case, re-interviewing elderly witnesses, and poring over old files. Few took his efforts seriously. He himself called it a hobby with a self-deprecating smile. But no one could have guessed that it would be August who'd be present when the truth finally began to surface. It was on a gray, rain-slicked afternoon in March 2023 that August received the call that would change everything. On the line was the nervous voice of Michael Boone, a local construction worker hired to renovate the east wing of the convent. What he described was disturbing, a discovery tucked behind a false wall in the old library. March 23rd arrived with a gentle wash of spring sunshine, warming the outskirts of Ashford Hollow, as Michael, a quiet man of 42 with 2 decades of experience restoring historic buildings, carefully dismantled a warped wooden panel along the northern wall. The project had been funded by the Department of the Interior as part of a cultural preservation grant aiming to transform the space into a small museum of sacred art. At first I figured it was just moisture damage, he would later recount. But when he tapped with his hammer, the sound was off hollow, as if something lay behind the stone. With precise hands, he removed more of the paneling and revealed a small recess carved into the wall. Just over a foot deep, it had been plastered over and concealed behind the aging wood. Inside, wrapped tightly in waxed cloth to ward off moisture, sat a rectangular bundle. Despite years of handling heavy tools, Michael's hands trembled slightly as he peeled back the layers. What he held was a brown leather journal, its edges curled and pages yellowed with time. On the first page, in elegant handwriting, a quiet declaration, property of Emily Hart, servant of God and bearer of truth. 1990 to 1991. Frozen in place. Michael stood among swirling plaster dust caught in a beam of light from the high, narrow window. Like everyone in Ashford Hollow, he knew the story of the missing sisters, but to him, it had always been more ghost story than gospel. Now, he was holding evidence that the legend had roots. His first instinct was to call Mother Superior Sor Amelia, but he hesitated. Another name came to mind: August Stone, the retired officer who'd spent half his life chasing shadows. Though not close friends, Michael and August had nodded to one another now and then at Bar Holloway, the old tavern near the cathedral. But everyone in town knew of August's tireless obsession with the mystery. Tucking the journal safely into his work satchel, Michael took his break and stepped outside. From his phone, he dialed August's number. 45 minutes later, they were sitting across from each other in August's modest apartment, the journal resting between them on a worn kitchen table like a dormant bomb. "We should turn it over to the authorities," said Michael, visibly torn between civic duty and the pull of forbidden knowledge. August, a slender man of 56 with prematurely white hair, gently laid a hand on the cover. "We will," he said softly. "But first, we have to understand what it says." It's been 32 years, Michael. 32 years of silence. With reverent care, August opened the journal. The first entries were innocent enough notes on convent life, musings on the weather, and updates from the garden. Emily's script was neat and deliberate, the hand of someone raised in discipline. But as the pages turned, a subtle shift took hold. By November 1990, the tone darkened. November 4th, 1990. Today, Sister Claire confided something that left me breathless. I cannot write it here, not even in these private pages. If it is true, oh Lord, help me understand. Help me forgive. The entries grew more cryptic. Vague mentions of documents, a secret buried beneath the convent, and betrayal. On January 5th, 1991, Emily wrote, "Sister Eleanor confirmed it. The records Claire uncovered are genuine. We can't stay silent anymore. But who would believe us? Who do we turn to when the very walls around us were built from lies?" August and Michael exchanged stunned glances as they read. Then came the final entry dated February 17th, 1991, the day before the sisters vanished. "Tomorrow we leave." Sister Eleanor received the confirmation we needed. The man in the dark suit brought final proof. There's no turning back now. If anyone finds this journal one day, know this: we didn't run from fear, but out of necessity. The truth must be told. But we can't do it from here. We're being watched. Father Thomas is not who he claims to be. The basement beneath the chapel holds more than relics and dusty wine. May God forgive us for what we are about to do, and forgive those who turned his house into a sanctuary of lies. Michael let out a low whistle as his eyes scanned that line. "The basement," he muttered. "What the hell is in the basement?" August didn't respond right away. His mind, trained and sharpened by years of quiet obsession, was moving rapidly, assembling fragments long stored in the corners of memory. Father Thomas Greaves, mentioned in the journal, had served as parish priest of Ashford Hollow until 1995, when he was abruptly reassigned to a small parish in the U.S. Virgin Islands. He had passed away in 2010. And the basement, according to the old blueprints August had once studied, there was indeed a network of tunnels and vaults beneath the chapel built during the era of the Inquisition, allegedly sealed off in the late 1800s. "We need to go to the convent," August said at last. "Right now." Michael blanched. "You're out of your mind. We can't just show up and start poking around in the basement. We need clearance. What about Mother Superior's permission?" "It's been 32 years. August interrupted, his voice suddenly unyielding. "If we wait on official channels, whoever's still tied to this might get just enough time to erase everything. You have access because of the renovations. I have investigative experience, and together we have a moral duty to find out what happened to those women." After nearly an hour of heated discussion, they struck a compromise. They would notify the local sheriff, but first, that same afternoon, Michael would bring August to the convent under the pretense of consulting on historical elements of the restoration. They'd try to take a look at the basement just to see if there was something worth opening an official case over. What they uncovered in that dust-choked cellar, lit only by the weak beam from Michael's phone flashlight, surpassed their darkest imaginings. Hidden behind an old wine rack, they found a rusting metal door that seemed far too modern for the rest of the room, secured with a lock that showed signs of recent repeated use. And on the wall beside it, scratched faintly into the stone, with what looked like the tip of a blade, was a message that made the blood drain from their faces. "Sisters, forgive us. Look in the Diocesan Archive file, 1943, B. May God have mercy on us all." The discovery sent shockwaves through the quiet foundations of the convent and beyond. August and Michael, grasping the magnitude of what they'd found, contacted Lieutenant Marcus Vale of the Civil Guard in nearby Albany County. Vale, a meticulous 38-year-old with a solid record of handling sensitive cases, arrived in Ashford Hollow that very night with 2 officers and a forensic technician. The basement door was officially opened in the presence of Mother Superior Sor Amelia, a 72-year-old nun who had entered the convent long after the sisters vanished, and who had only known of the case as part of institutional lore. Her face registered disbelief and something close to dread as the agents broke through the rusted lock. Inside the room, no more than 130 square feet, was little more than bare stone walls and a concrete floor. At first glance, it looked uneventfully barren. A few metal shelves, neatly stacked cardboard boxes, a weathered desk with a matching chair. But then the technician swept the floor with his ultraviolet light, and what had appeared ordinary shifted instantly to sinister. Dark stains emerged in a circular pattern invisible to the naked eye. Preliminary testing confirmed the worst. Human blood. Very old. Preserved by the cold, dry conditions of the basement. This doesn't automatically mean a crime took place, Lieutenant Vale cautioned, noticing how pale Mother Sor Amelia had become. There could be innocent explanations. But the boxes on the shelves told another story. They were filled with financial records spanning 1975 to 1991, meticulously filed. There were wire transfer receipts to Swiss and Cayman Islands accounts, contracts with pharmaceutical companies, and most disturbing of all, photographs of children, all between the ages of 8 and 12, with identification numbers handwritten on the back. "We need file 1943B from the Diocesan Archive," August murmured, remembering the inscription on the wall. "Whatever this is, that file could be the key." Vale gave a grave nod. "First, we secure this scene. Tomorrow morning, I'll file for a court order to access those church records." That night, as Ashford Hollow lay in peaceful sleep, unaware of the tremor rumbling beneath its history, 3 people found no rest. August haunted by the faces of those children. Michael plagued by questions about what other secrets the walls he'd been restoring might still be hiding. And Elena Greaves, an investigative reporter from the Albany Herald, who had arrived quietly at sundown after receiving a tip from an anonymous source. By the next morning, as whispers of the basement discovery began slipping through the cracks of town gossip, Judge Raymond Ellis signed off on the warrant. The Diocesan Archive, housed in an annex of St. James Cathedral, was managed by Father Paul Whitcomb, a frail old priest who had overseen the archive for nearly 3 decades. "File 1943B," he echoed, puzzled, when Lieutenant Vale presented the order. "I don't recall any file classified that way." Our system is year and name-based, not letters. After 2 fruitless hours of searching, Father Whitcomb paused before an old safe embedded into his office wall. There's only one place something like that could be. The restricted archive. Only the bishop and I have the combination. His arthritic hands trembling, the priest slowly turned the dial. The safe opened with a soft, metallic click, revealing a small compartment containing barely a dozen folders. At the back, faded but unmistakable, was a blue file labeled 1943B. "I don't understand," whispered Whitcomb. "I've never seen this before, and I've been archivist here for 27 years. Lieutenant Vale, now wearing gloves, placed the folder on the table and opened it carefully. Inside were documents that painted a chilling picture. A long-running international adoption network operated out of St. Mary's Convent between 1975 and 1990. The records revealed that children mostly from vulnerable families across Latin America had been brought to the United States under the guise of education and opportunity, only to be adopted by wealthy families in exchange for large donations. One letter stood out. Signed by the former Bishop of Ashford Hollow, Monsignor Edward Valverde, who died in 2005, it granted Father Thomas Greaves full authority to carry out the charitable work while urging him to maintain discretion and establish channels as always. The letter was dated January 1987, right at the time when international adoptions in the U.S. were beginning to face stricter federal oversight. But what sent a chill down their spines was a medical report attached, signed in 1988 by Dr. Claire Whitaker, 3 years before she took her vows and became Sister Claire. The document outlined deeply troubling irregularities in the handling of the children, excessive sedation during transfers, and signs of possible abuse. The report ended with a single, heavily underlined sentence: "I can no longer be complicit in this. My conscience won't allow it." "Oh dear God," whispered Father Whitcomb, his face paling as he read over Lieutenant Vale's shoulder. "How could something like this happen, and no one know?" August pointed toward a handwritten note clipped to the report, a torn sheet from a notebook bearing the St. Mary's Convent letterhead, penned in the unmistakable hand of Sister Eleanor. I confronted Father Thomas with the evidence Claire gathered it read. He threatened to report us for theft of confidential documents. I fear for our safety. Emily discovered something buried in the old basement records that may protect us, but we have to act quickly. As they pored over the documents, the archive's phone rang sharply, slicing the silence. Father Whitcomb answered, and his face turned ashen. "The police. They've found something else at the convent." Indeed, during a more thorough sweep of the cellar, the forensic team had uncovered a small, concealed cavity behind one of the shelves. Inside, wrapped tightly in plastic and shielded by the arid environment, was an old mobile phone, a 90s-era Nokia, with a handwritten note taped to it. Final proof. Code 1909. The number matched the date of the nun's disappearance, September 18th. Using a compatible battery, the technicians managed to power the device. There was a single audio recording. The quality was rough, muffled by time, but the voices were unmistakable. Father Thomas arguing heatedly with Sister Eleanor. "You've got nothing," the priest snapped. "It's all conjecture. Who's going to believe 3 nuns over the word of a parish priest and a bishop?" "We have the documents," replied Sister Eleanor, her tone sharp and unwavering. "And Claire has contacts in Boston. Journalists, attorneys. They're ready to speak. What do you think will happen if this gets out? To you, to the convent, to the church. Do you really want to be responsible for that kind of scandal? Think of the damage it'll do to people's faith. The greatest damage to faith," she said. Voice trembling with fury, "is using God's name to excuse evil. Those children deserve justice. Their families deserve truth." The recording ended abruptly with a loud crash, either a slammed door or something far worse. That same afternoon, as the story began to surface on national media, thanks to a breaking article by Elena Greaves in the Guadalajara Times, the Civil Guard in Ashford Hollow received an anonymous phone call. The voice, electronically distorted, delivered precise GPS coordinates to a wooded area roughly 25 miles outside the town. The message was brief and haunting. Look beneath the fallen oak. The truth has been buried for 32 years, but it can still speak. Lieutenant Vale immediately assembled a team. As the sun dipped below the horizon over the New England countryside, the long, cold mystery that began on a bitter February night in 1991 seemed to be inching toward resolution. But no one, least of all August Stone, was prepared for what they'd find beneath that ancient oak, nor for the earthquake of revelation it would send through the country when the full truth came to light. Authorized to accompany the search as a civilian consultant, due to his decades-long study of the case, August felt the weight of inevitability as the convoy of off-road vehicles rumbled deep into the woods. A phrase from Emily's diary echoed in his thoughts. The truth must come out. But not from here. Had the three nuns tried to reach this very place that night in 91? And what if what lay beneath the tree wasn't a clue, but three long-lost bodies? At dawn on March 26, 2023, a special operations unit from the Civil Guard arrived at the designated site. Guided by the coordinates, they found the fallen oak, its charred trunk confirming it had been felled by lightning years ago. Under the watchful eye of Judge Raymond Ellis, who had arrived in person due to the sensitivity of the investigation, excavation began near the exposed roots. 3 tense hours later, the shovels struck something solid at roughly 3 feet down. It wasn't human remains as many had feared, but a small sealed metal case, no larger than a carry-on suitcase. Though its outer shell bore the stains of time and rust from the damp soil, the metal case had held up remarkably well. With extreme care, forensic technicians opened it right there in the clearing, documenting each step with high-resolution photos and rolling video. Inside, wrapped in layers of waxed cloth and plastic sheeting, lay a trove of evidence folders filled with detailed reports, old photographs, audio tapes, and even vintage 3.5-inch floppy disks, each carefully labeled with dates ranging from 1982 to 1991. Among them was a sealed envelope, boldly marked, "To be opened only in the event of our death or disappearance." Sisters Eleanor, Matthews, Claire Whitaker, and Emily Hart. Judge Ellis gave the immediate order to unseal it. What emerged was a handwritten letter signed by all 3 women, and its opening lines sent a chill through everyone gathered. "If you are reading this, then we are likely dead. What we discovered inside St. Mary's Convent placed our lives at serious risk. But silence is not an option our conscience can accept." What followed was a harrowing account of how the 3 nuns had gradually uncovered a child trafficking network operating under the guise of an international adoption program. It had all begun when Sister Claire, drawing from her background in medicine, noticed disturbing inconsistencies in the medical records of children who passed through the convent en route to their so-called adoptive families. Sister Emily, who helped care for the children, had formed close bonds with them and began documenting unsettling conversations, children who spoke of parents still alive back home, who mentioned being chosen from orphanages or even taken from their homes under false promises. Sister Eleanor, the eldest and most authoritative of the 3, began poring over the convent's financial records. What she uncovered were massive discrepancies between the reported donations and the actual funds received. Following the money trail, she found accounts in offshore havens, shell foundations linked to high-ranking church officials. The letter recounted how when they first approached Father Thomas with their suspicions, he assured them he would look into it. But when they later presented hard evidence, his tone shifted dramatically. He threatened them with legal action for defaming clergy and reminded them of their vows of obedience. That was when the sisters decided to act alone. Sister Claire reached out to former colleagues from the hospital where she once worked in Barcelona. Sister Eleanor tapped into her administrative connections to access restricted documents within the convent. And Emily, driven by youthful conviction, set about earning the trust of the children and carefully documenting their stories. The turning point came when they discovered reference to a file named 1943B, overheard by Emily, during a private conversation between Father Thomas and a stranger. At first they believed the number referred to a year, but soon realized it was a code, one tied to a chilling reality. Project 1943B had apparently originated in the post-war years, spearheaded by ultra-conservative factions within the Spanish Church to re-educate children of political dissidents. Over the decades, the program had morphed into something far more insidious. In February 1991, a man claiming to be an investigative journalist visited the convent and showed them documents and photographs implicating the adoption network in global child exploitation. Some of these very materials were now part of the case file inside the box. That was when we knew our lives were in danger, Sister Eleanor wrote. The journalist, whose identity remains protected for safety, had received threats. 2 days after visiting the convent, his car was found wrecked on a remote country road. The letter described how the sisters no longer trusted anyone in the church or even local law enforcement, long known for their close ties to Father Thomas. The letter went on to detail their desperate plan. They would fake their disappearance and smuggle the evidence out of the country, intending to hand it to international media and authorities. The box had been prepared as a safeguard buried the night before their escape. If everything went as planned, the letter read, then we succeeded in exposing this criminal network and are now safe somewhere far from here. But if you're reading this, something went terribly wrong. The letter ended with a plea to investigate those involved. The list was damning. Father Thomas, Bishop Valverde, 2 senior officials from the Ministry of Social Affairs at the time, and several wealthy bankers and corporate executives tied to the shadowy nonprofits funding the program. But the true gut punch came in the final paragraph. There is one last piece of information that may help find us dead or alive. On the night of our planned escape, we were supposed to meet our contact, the journalist, at the Guadalajara bus terminal at 2:00 a.m. He would drive us to Madrid, where a flight awaited. We knew Father Thomas suspected something. We saw him tailing Emily that afternoon. If we never reached our destination, search the route between Ashford Hollow and Guadalajara. The car was a gray Renault 21 Madrid plates. The driver's name was Calvin Reed. Silence hung in the air after the letter was read, until the sharp ring of a phone cut through the stillness. Colonel Matthews, commanding officer of the Central Investigative Unit, was on the line with Lieutenant Vale. What he relayed confirmed their worst fears. Back in 1991, a gray Renault 21 matching that license plate had been found at the bottom of a steep ravine roughly 12 miles outside Ashford Hollow. The incident had been recorded in 1991 as a tragic car accident. The driver, a freelance journalist named Calvin Reed, had died on impact. No passengers were listed, and the investigation at the time had been shockingly cursory. "We need to excavate that vehicle immediately," Judge Ellis ordered, "and I want every inch of land surrounding the crash site thoroughly examined." August Stone, who had been silently listening in on the call, felt a cold shiver crawl down his spine. After 32 years, they were finally on the verge of uncovering what really happened that winter night, and he feared the truth might be far darker than any of them had ever imagined. That very afternoon, as forensic teams worked to recover the long-buried vehicle, Elena Greaves received an anonymous call in her modest hotel room in Ashford Hollow. The voice on the line was that of an elderly woman, soft but unwavering. "Find Gabriel Bosch in Barcelona. He has the final piece, a silver medallion his sister left behind as a message." Gabriel Bosch, the brother of Sister Claire, who had spent decades searching for her, was located in a retirement home on the outskirts of the city. At 81, his health had declined, but his mind remained sharp. When investigators showed him the newly unearthed documents, tears rolled silently down the deep creases of his face. "I always knew Claire didn't walk away from her vows by choice," he whispered. "She was the bravest, most principled soul I've ever known." With trembling hands, Gabriel opened a small wooden box he kept by his bedside and revealed the silver medallion left by Claire atop her open Bible years ago. He carefully opened it, revealing what everyone had assumed was simply a keepsake photograph of their parents. But Elena, peering closer, noticed something odd around the photo's edges. "There's something behind this," she murmured, using tweezers to delicately extract it. Behind the old snapshot was a microfiche, an antiquated format once used to store miniaturized documents. When they had it scanned at a lab equipped to handle such relics, what emerged was shocking. A new set of precise GPS coordinates, different from those of the fallen oak, and a single chilling sentence, "In case we fail." The truth, all of it is here. Meanwhile, the Renault 21 had finally been recovered from the ravine, where it had rested hidden beneath foliage for over 3 decades. Preliminary forensic analysis confirmed that the vehicle's brake lines had been deliberately tampered with. Even more unsettling blood traces were discovered in the trunk, and they did not belong to Calvin Reed. Guided by the coordinates found on the microfiche, a new search team was dispatched to a remote area of the Cuenca Highlands. After hours of painstaking combing, they stumbled upon the unthinkable, a dilapidated cabin deep in the woods. Inside, the remains of 3 women lay undisturbed. Forensic identification confirmed what everyone had feared. They had found sisters Eleanor, Claire, and Emily. Early analysis revealed the women had been executed with precise gunshots to the back of the head, clinical, calculated, and merciless. On the cabin's wooden wall, scrawled in haste and desperation, was one final message: "Forgive those who hunted us. The truth will prevail." And prevail it did. 32 years after their disappearance, the secret these courageous women had uncovered finally came into the light. They had never run from their faith, as many had speculated. They gave their lives trying to shield innocent children from a monstrous network that had operated for decades under the guise of ecclesiastical charity and moral authority. The months that followed sent tremors across the nation. Dubbed the Sisters of Ashford Hollow case by the media, the revelations triggered one of the largest investigations into child trafficking in modern U.S. history. The documents the sisters had preserved with such precision and foresight provided undeniable proof stretching back decades. Now under the jurisdiction of the federal court due to the international nature and scale of the crimes, the investigation unveiled a sprawling network that had moved undetected for nearly 50 years. More than 200 children were identified illegally taken from families in Colombia, Peru, Guatemala, and El Salvador. Promised a better life in America, many instead had been exploited across several European countries. Though key figures such as Father Thomas Greaves and Bishop Valverde had already passed away, several of their accomplices were still alive, and finally justice was coming. The arrests included 2 former officials from the Department of Social Services who had forged adoption documents, 3 businessmen who financed the operation, and a former member of the Ashford Hollow Sheriff's Department who had helped cover up the fatal crash in 1991. The impact on the town was seismic. For decades, this quiet New England hamlet had lived with the mystery like a ghost story passed around in hushed tones. Now it had to confront something far darker, an ugly truth buried beneath layers of silence and reverence. Some of the town's elderly came forward, admitting they'd seen strange things in those years. Children who appeared and vanished without a trace. Cars arriving at the convent under cover of night, but fear of retaliation and a deep-seated respect for the church had kept them quiet. After the investigation, St. Mary's Convent was temporarily closed. The current sisters, entirely uninvolved in the historic crimes, were reassigned to other convents across the country. The U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops issued an official statement condemning the events and pledging full cooperation with federal authorities, though for many, the gesture felt decades too late. For the families of the 3 sisters, the truth was both devastating and vindicating. Antonio Hart, father of Emily, had passed away years before, but her uncle Miguel lived to finally learn her fate. "I always knew she was a good girl," he told reporters, his voice shaking. "Now the world knows she was a hero." Gabriel Bosch, who had spent his entire adult life chasing answers about his sister Claire, was at last able to bury her with dignity. During her memorial in a small chapel in Barcelona, he spoke through tears of the little girl who once dreamed of curing every disease in the world. In the end, he said she tried to heal something even more deadly, our indifference to the pain of others. Carmen Matthews, niece of Sister Eleanor, chose to honor her aunt's memory by founding a nonprofit to support victims of human trafficking. Aunt Eleanor always said that faith without action is dead, Carmen said. She lived that truth until her final breath. But perhaps the most profound ripple of this case came from the victims and their families. Thanks to the meticulous records kept by the three nuns, especially Claire, with her precision as a former physician, many of the trafficked children were finally identified, now grown adults. Some learned the truth about their origins for the first time, launching them into emotional identity crises. Others who had long suspected something about their upbringing didn't add up found long-awaited answers. Reunions were arranged between birth parents and their children separated by decades. There were tears, long embraces, stories poured out like confessions, and in many cases the painful realization that time could never be reclaimed. But still, even this late, the truth brought healing. For August Stone, the retired officer who had spent years piecing the puzzle together, the moment felt like redemption. It was never an obsession, he told Elena Greaves in an exclusive interview. It was a promise I made to those women, even if they were gone, that one day the truth would rise. Michael Boone, the construction worker whose accidental discovery had ignited the entire investigation, turned down every media offer and book deal that came his way. I only did what any decent person would have done, he insisted. Still, he agreed to speak at the ceremony where St. Mary's Convent was formally reopened, not as a place of worship, but as a human rights documentation center with a special focus on fighting human trafficking. The international aftermath was far-reaching. Adoption protocols were reviewed and revised in multiple countries. New safeguards and vetting processes were implemented to prevent future abuses. Human rights organizations cited the case as a stark reminder that even institutions created for good can fall prey to corruption when left unchecked by accountability and transparency. A memorial plaque now hangs inside the former convent, bearing a simple inscription: in memory of Eleanor Matthews, Claire Whitaker, and Emily Hart, who gave their lives for truth and justice. 1991-2023. Ashford Hollow. Like any small town hit by a national reckoning, took years to recover from the collective trauma. But slowly the community began rebuilding itself, this time on a foundation of honesty. Conversations long buried beneath layers of polite silence were finally had. Complicit hush was replaced by public courage. Hard truths replaced soft rumors. Elena Greaves, the journalist who gave voice to the story, later published a deeply researched book about the case. In her epilogue, she wrote, "Perhaps the greatest legacy of the Sisters of Ashford Hollow is not just the exposure of a criminal network or the long overdue justice for its victims, but the reminder that truth, however painful, is the only bedrock upon which a just society can be built." These three women taught us that faith does not hide behind walls of silence. It walks headfirst into the dark, even at the cost of everything. Every February 18th, the anniversary of the sisters' disappearance, the town now holds a candlelight vigil in the central square. People of all ages gather, many of them with no personal ties to the events, to honor the memory of the three brave women. It's more than just a tribute. It's a reminder that no matter how deeply buried secrets have a way of rising. Inside the convent's old library now, a permanent exhibit about the case, Emily Hart's journal, sits open in a glass display turned to its final entry. It reads, "If anyone finds this diary one day, know that we did not run out of fear but out of necessity. The truth must come to light." And 32 years later, that light finally came breaking through the shadows many had hoped would never be disturbed, and proving that justice, though long delayed, never loses its power to heal. So what did you think of this story? Did you see the ending coming? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoy stories like this, real, mysterious, and unforgettable, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, hit that like button, and share this story with someone who'd be just as captivated.